Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Global Agenda at the University of Delaware. I'm Ralph Begleiter, Director of the Center for Political Communication, and I'm always pleased to announce that Global Agenda is supported by the University of Delaware's Institute for Global Studies, the Department of Political Science and International Relations, and the Department of Communication. For many years, you could drive from Delaware to Washington, passing through Baltimore, and past the most secretive espionage agency in the U.S. government without ever knowing it was there. Today, the National Security Agency has a big sign on the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. The Central Intelligence Agency also has a big sign on the highway in Langley, Virginia. Neither the CIA nor the NSA, however, is open to the public. They both still do some of the most secretive work the United States government does. They intercept telephone calls and text messages, screen internet traffic from emails and other transmissions. They pick up signals from secret microphones hidden in the walls of foreign government offices, both in Washington and around the world. They aim sophisticated electronic devices at foreign government agencies to catch their conversations and computer transmissions. They recruit and hire secret agents and double agents and moles. They build and launch satellites to circle the Earth, taking pictures so clear you can read the license plates in the Kremlin parking lot, or the tracks in the dirt roads of India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and North Korea and Iran. They build, equip, and launch unmanned aircraft as large as a plane or as small as a bird, capable of reading the headlines on a newspaper or of delivering a guided missile to a target as small as a speeding car in Yemen. The CIA and the NSA create secret codes and break them. They make phony documents and false identities and try to decipher the false identities others use. These agencies use espionage and intelligence both as defensive weapons and as offensive ones. They target bad guys like our political enemies and good guys like our political friends. The activities in which the CIA and NSA are involved around the world are usually secret, but sometimes they become public, such as when the United States successfully steered a special operations force from the Pentagon to locate and kill Osama bin Laden last summer. But they also were involved when the U.S. tried unsuccessfully to kill bin Laden in the late 1990s with remote-controlled missiles fired from afar. And sometimes they become public when journalists discover what they're doing and reveal them publicly, such as when the NSA was reported by the New York Times to be spying on phone calls and emails by American citizens in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. Our guest speaker tonight, retired Air Force General Michael Hayden, has served as the nation's top intelligence executive, as both the director of the National Security Agency and of the Central Intelligence Agency. Appointed by President Clinton in 1999, General Hayden took on the directorship of the National Security Agency and the Central Security Service. He won't remember this, but it was because of his famous efforts to open up the secretive NSA during the early 2000s that I first invited him to speak here at the University of Delaware. He stayed at NSA through some of the most challenging contemporary moments after the 9/11 attacks against the United States, helping to improve and coordinate U.S. intelligence efforts, until President Bush appointed him CIA director in 2006. General Hayden retired from public service in 2009. He earned his BA and MA in history at Duquesne University and is currently a distinguished visiting professor at George Mason University's School of Public Policy in Washington. Please welcome General Michael Hayden to the University of Delaware.
Well, thank you. I'm going to speak in a whisper tonight because I'm going to be telling very secret things. That's not true. I'm not going to tell some. Thank you so much for the opportunity. This doesn't hurt, so I hope it doesn't hurt you. I told Ralph's class earlier that I will try to be communicative, and I don't think I am communicable, so I think everything's okay. As Ralph pointed out, I've been the head of 2 intelligence agencies, and there are many similarities between CIA and NSA: sense of service, country before self, working in the world of espionage, the burden of secrecy. But they are really 2 different kind of organizations. NSA, for example, I can actually tell you how many people work there. It's 35,000. Okay? Half of them are GIs, half of them are civilians. I can't tell you how many people work at CIA. That's secret. But they're all civilians. That we do know. I came to NSA at a point in its life arc where, frankly, the agency needed to be shaken up. And so I was kind of a different kind of director for NSA than I was when I got to CIA. When I got there in 2006, where, frankly, it needed to be settled down. It was source and subject for just too much of your morning newspaper. And that turmoil was destroying the agency's focus. I can still recall my first meeting. I'd been sworn in the Oval Office. I'd driven up the George Washington Parkway to CIA headquarters. We had an auditorium bigger than this, but not a whole lot bigger. It's called the Bubble. It's near our original headquarters building. And I actually remember saying to the CIA workforce, blow into the paper bag, get those CO2 levels back to normal, go back to work. This stuff, or some other word like that, is over. Okay? So, different times, different agencies. They also do different things. I mean, CIA extracts information of intelligence value through human beings. NSA does it through electronics. The source over here is a living, breathing thing. The source over here ultimately is living and breathing, but the part we engage with is a product of their electromagnetic communications. Right? And so what I want to do today is talk about my time at NSA, kind of pull you through a little bit of recent history. I'll try to mention enough things that kind of keep the intellectual juices flowing. Some controversial things that I won't back away from, and I know Ralph's going to ask me questions about it when we get to the Q&A, and I welcome yours. But in essence, what I want you to do is to become familiar with the world of signals intelligence, because that's what NSA does. In our terminology, it's sigint, all right? It's becoming party to a communication for which you are not the intended recipient. Okay? And that's hard work. It really is. I mean, to give a decision maker like the president actionable intelligence derived, again, from a conversation for which you are not the intended recipient, conversation going on between 2 individuals who may be speaking more than one language that is not your own, between 2 individuals who are speaking in various codes and metaphors and understandings, 2 individuals whose ability to separate the world as it is from the world as they want it to be may not be quite the same as yours. That's what signals intelligence attempts to do. Now, this thing began kind of with Marconi. I mean, you got to turn human thought into something in the electromagnetic spectrum in order to be in this kind of business. Let me just pull you through a couple of examples so you get a sense of the history as we run up to the current day. If I say HF, everyone kind of remember high frequency communications. They're out there. It's kind of the original long haul communications. By the way, they're still there. Any of you remember microwave communications? Those towers you used to see? Okay. We describe that as getting to the midpoint. You know, if I had a communicant here and a communicant there, and if I had the same kind of gear that they had, and I could get in between them, I could become party to that conversation. Okay? In terms of microwave, I'm looking around here, I know the science tradition here at the university. You know, that microwave sends those signals out in a straight line, right? And they go from antenna to antenna to antenna. And by the way, you know, God made this just right. That continues in a straight line, even if it just slightly missed the antenna. So if you can put a catcher's mitt way out here, even if it's 28,000 miles in space, you can grab that microwave shot and turn it into something useful for American national security. Then in our lifetime here, people began to take their communications out of the air and began to put them into the ground. First with copper, and now with fiber optic cable. And I gotta tell you, as tough as that signals intelligence thing was when that stuff was in the air, it's really tough when it's in the ground. I was being interviewed by 60 Minutes when I was director of NSA. It was 2000, the year 2000. And I think it was David Martin, who's still there doing the Pentagon work for CBS. He's interviewing me in my office, and I see there's something under his chair. And midway through the interview, with the camera still rolling, he reaches under his chair and pulls out some fiber optic cable and puts it in front of me and says, "Now, General, what's this?" And I didn't, but I almost went like this. Because intercepting something that's in the ground is really, really difficult. And then, as I said, in our lifetime, we went into the ground. And then in the lifetime, even of some of the younger folks here, okay, we went to something called the World Wide Web. We went to the internet. Never before has our species put things of importance to us out there in the electromagnetic spectrum. We have never put so much of things we value out there in ones and zeros. Secrets, important secrets that governments used to keep in safes, guarded by high walls and rough-looking, very heavily armed human beings, are now sitting out there on computer systems as ones and zeros, just inviting signals intelligence agencies from around the world to come and try to get it. Now, I described that microwave shot, okay, going across, or HF, propagating out there, and I said, that's kind of midpoint stuff, right? You got to get out there and between the communicants or behind one of the communicants to get it. We also have coined a phrase for this World Wide Web thing, okay? It's not midpoint, we call it endpoint. And here, you're not sitting passively by waiting for somebody to send a signal that you can intercept. You're using the global web to commute to the target and to pull the signal out of the target, whether or not he has decided to send it or decided to let it reside on his home computer. Just imagine what's out there sitting on computers around the world if you can access them from a signals and intelligence agency. By the way, this last thing I told you about, remember I said I was head of CIA and head of NSA? Well, this endpoint, this commuting to the target and going to where the information is, not waiting for him to send it and pulling it out, that became almost a steel cage death match between CIA and NSA as to who should have primacy over doing this. Bear with me, I think it's a fascinating story. Let me try it on you, all right? I'm old enough to remember being in the Air Force, and we had those IBM Selectric typewriters. Remember all those? For the students, there are a few in the museum down at the Smithsonian. You can see them there. And when I was in Korea, we would put something called an OCR ball on the Selectric, optical character reader. So you could type the message so that you could then take the message, this physical thing, walk across the street to the communications center, give it to the comm guy, who would then scan it through a machine, and that physical stuff, your message, got turned into electrons for the purpose of sending it, in my case, from Korea to Washington. And when it got to Washington, what happened? That electromagnetic energy hits a printer, and it gets turned back into physical reality, and then put in a cubbyhole, and somebody comes and gets the message. Now, I know even in the telling of it, it sounds so archaic to me now, it's hard for me to believe that I spent most of my life doing it that way. I mean, you and I just hit the send button and it shows up on somebody's screen. Well, the point I want to make is, for the life of NSA and CIA said, we're in charge of stealing physical data at rest. And we folks up at Fort Meade said, that's cool, because we're in charge of stealing electromagnetic data in motion. And now, what you've got on your home computer is an entirely new class of reality. Electronic data at rest. Now, the folks over at CIA said, ain't moving, must be ours. And the folks over at NSA said, it's electronic, that's ours. I must tell you, my first 2 years as director of NSA were consumed arguing with CIA over who's in charge of this. It finally, after 9/11, went to the President of the United States. And he said, let me tell you how I want you to do this. You guys at CIA, go for it, and treat it like physical data. And you guys over at NSA, you go for it too, and you treat it as electronic data. Sorry, I've kind of pulled you through a bit of history of signals intelligence, but the point I want to conclude with, and to really make, is that in terms of stealing other people's secrets, current technology is making this the golden age of signals intelligence. Just think of how much stuff that's important to you that you throw out there in ones and zeros every minute of every day, and then multiply that by everyone on the planet. If we do this half well, in terms of collecting this kind of information, this is the golden age of signals intelligence, as I suggest. But we have to do it half well. And this is really hard to do. When I was director of NSA, we said our three problems, we did this little formula, we called it V cubed. We have to deal with the volume, variety, and velocity of modern communications. And remember I said way back 10 minutes ago that if he's transmitting to him and you can get in between them and you have the same kind of equipment they have, you can become party to the communication. Well, just look at how quickly your telecommunications universe changes. How many times do you re-up for your phone? How many times do you turn that one in for the next model? How many times does Apple come out with yet another iPad with different technology? And so we were very much challenged at NSA to keep up with this revolution in telecommunications. In January of 2000, it became very clear to me as director of NSA, we weren't keeping up. In January of the year 2000, our asynchronous transfer mode network at Fort Meade went belly up. And all American signals intelligence collection stopped. The front end of the system was still collecting stuff, but we couldn't move it. We couldn't transfer it. We could not take this massive volume and bring it into Fort Meade and work it with our computers and dispatch it to different people to take meaning and make meaning out of these various signals. I mean, when I think back on that now, for about 96 hours, America wasn't reading anybody's mail. And that's a very dangerous world in which America had to exist. I mean, we moved heaven and earth to get us back in business. Blessedly, the system went down on a Monday night, about 6 o'clock. About 2 o'clock Tuesday morning, a nor'easter came walking up the eastern seaboard and dropped about 2 feet of snow in eastern Maryland. And so nobody was coming to work. Everyone was snowed in. And so the only thing worse than America not reading anybody's mail was everybody else knowing we weren't reading anybody's mail. And so we had this extra day where, in essence, no one came to work, that we could work to get the system back up. We did not get it back up. People finally came to work on Wednesday. We had signs tacked to the door. We are experiencing intermittent problems with our network. Consult your supervisor before logging on. And finally, about 10 o'clock that morning, I made an announcement to the entire workforce. This is a big deal. This is really bad. This is very dangerous. This is not the back end of the conversation tonight while you're doing dishes with your wife that begins, honey, you won't believe what happened to me at work today. You have got to keep this secret. We did. We kept it secret Wednesday, we kept it secret Thursday, we kept it secret Friday. The thing popped up on Friday, we were back in business. All that stuff that had been collected out there started to roll. We didn't lose any collection, but now we had to catch up with it. We got more snow on Friday. There's now about 3 feet of snow on Fort Meade. My wife and I, Janine, sitting up here in the front row, are cross-country skiing on the Fort Meade golf course. We're going along here thinking, okay, life is all good. And a cop car comes up behind me, okay? And he just, I'm skiing, he follows. I move, he moves, okay? This had not happened to me since the age of 14. And finally he said, you General Hayden? Yeah. Sir, we got to take you back to the headquarters. So I throw my skis. We're about 2 miles from home, right? It's getting dark. I throw my skis in the car. My wife's there. So she had to ski home. I got to the headquarters. She's fit. It was okay. So we got to the headquarters, and the story was John McQuethy of ABC News had the story. He said, you guys have been down for 4 days. So I said, I'll call you back, John. So I called George Tenet, who was the DCI at the time, said, George, they got the story. Well, don't tell him anything. I said, no, George, there's no way to hide this. We got to tell him. He said, okay, use your judgment. So I called McQuethy back, and I said, yeah, John, I can confirm the story. But we're up now, we're running. We're up to speed, we're working through the backlog. We are full up round. And he says, how do I know that? Why should I believe you? Or something along those lines. I said, John, if we weren't back up and running, would I have taken your call? He goes, ooh, you're right. So the point I want to make is that although this could be the golden age for signals intelligence, technologically it is incredibly challenging. And we as a nation have got to invest our best and brightest into doing this. But that's not the only challenge with this new world. There's a second challenge, and it's more ethical. It has more to do with policy than technology. It has more to do with civil liberties than it does with, does our ATM network still work? Remember those microwaves I was showing you? One shot from here. And, microwaves kind of hand off the signal. They go so far. They hit an antenna, pipe it to another antenna, it shoots it out, and off it goes. Well, imagine, if you will, that system I just showed you begins at Strategic Rocket Forces headquarters in Moscow, okay? And through a series of microwave shots, goes out to an ICBM field out there on the Russian steppe. Okay? Those are very important signals. You would want us to intercept those, to look for key words like launch. And there is not an American civil libertarian, no matter how focused he or she might be on the Fourth Amendment to the US Constitution, who would raise even their little finger about NSA intercepting a signal along a dedicated microwave circuit from Strategic Rocket Forces headquarters in Moscow out to an ICBM field in Siberia. There are no civil liberty concerns. But that is not today's world. There are no longer good guy networks and bad guy networks. There are no longer targeted networks and Fourth Amendment protected networks. We are all out there living on the same grid. We are all out there intermingled. Al-Qaeda uses the same global telecommunication system that you use to send notes to your relatives. It's all one. And so now, in addition to having this great opportunity, this great technological challenge of dealing with volume, variety, and velocity, we have a new, deeper philosophical question. Would you give NSA enough power and authority to intercept those signals you still want NSA to intercept, knowing that they coexist with your personal communications? Do you trust NSA enough to give them what it is they need to grab the bad signals and to leave yours alone? That's a big issue. In early 2001, Porter Goss, who later became head of CIA, Porter was chairman of the HPSCI. And this was a kind of a churning issue. And Porter wanted to kind of air it. So we had an open hearing, which is fairly unusual for NSA and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, that's what HPSCI means, to have an open hearing. And so we went down and I testified. And I said, NSA is very careful. We know the rules. We've got a whole code of conduct. It's called UCIT 18, but you don't need to remember that. You just need to know we have a whole code of conduct that kicks in to protect American privacy, to protect those people who are protected by the Fourth Amendment to the US Constitution. I actually remember saying something in that hearing. This is pre-9/11. I actually remember saying, if Osama bin Laden crossed the bridge between Niagara Falls, Ontario, and Niagara Falls, New York, he would begin to be protected by the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution because he is on United States territory. And my ability to track him at NSA would be severely degraded by the requirements of US law. And most of the people in the room said, what did he say? It was just such a foreign concept that we actually had such rules. Later on, post 9/11, post something that Ralph referred to called the terrorist surveillance program, the story broke in the New York Times. The story broke Thursday night on their website, hit the printed paper Friday morning. Saturday morning, the president scrapped his pre-recorded radio address and went on live defending the program. And now we were scrambling to inform more members of Congress beyond the Intelligence Committee chiefs who had been told about this. So we were trying to talk to the chair and ranking on the Senate Judiciary Committee. That would have been Senator Leahy and Senator Specter. Senator Leahy was up in Vermont. He didn't come down. Frankly, I don't think he wanted to have the briefing. Senator Specter, however, did. So I'm in secure spaces in the Capitol building with Senator Specter, Al Gonzalez, I'm trying to think of the timing. He's either White House counsel or already confirmed as Attorney General, me, and the senior member, Pat Roberts, senator from Kansas, and just the four of us talking. And I began, Al Gonzalez explains a couple legal principles, and he says, but Senator Specter, Hayden knows the details. Hayden's going to brief you. So I start rolling out what it is we're doing in the terrorist surveillance program. And Senator Specter says, stop. I'm not sure how you protect privacy here. And I'm saying, I'm sorry, Senator, I'm actually not talking about the terrorist surveillance program yet. I'm just talking about how we do our mission globally, overall. He said, no, I understand that, but not just U.S. privacy. How do you protect other people's privacy, foreign citizens and people overseas? And I actually said to him, Senator, if you're not protected by the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, your privacy is not part of my job description. In other words, we were very aggressive, going after targeted signals, and the only thing that stopped us was that provision in the Fourth Amendment that protects all of us against unreasonable search and seizure. Okay? So that's where we were. I realized I got a little bit ahead of the story, telling a post-9/11 story, but I wanted to get the idea in there about Fourth Amendment protections, and they apply, and when they don't. But that's kind of where the American intelligence community was on 9/11. Okay? Now, I was in my office on 9/11 at the top floor of the biggest building at NSA. Like you, first plane hits the building, must be an accident. 20 minutes later, somebody else hit the other building. This is not an accident. I turned to my executive assistant, said, get the head of security up here. Head of security comes walking in. As he's coming in one door, my executive assistant is coming in the other door saying, we have reports of explosions on the mall, which turned out to be inaccurate, but was a reflection of the plane hitting the Pentagon. Okay? I didn't even let the poor security guy talk. I said, all non-essential personnel out of here now. And he did a pivot, didn't even say anything, did a pivot, walked out, made the announcement, and non-essential personnel left NSA headquarters. We never did a head count. I don't know how many people stayed. My guess is 7,000 stayed at work. And we continued our mission. Almost immediately, we began to pick up chatter in the Al-Qaeda network, kind of that self-congratulatory kind of messaging. George Tenet called me about 10:30. He said, Mike, what do you got? I said, it's Al-Qaeda, George. He said, yeah, we know. But are you hearing it? Yeah, we're hearing it. Okay. That night, about dusk, remember, crisp, beautiful September day, not a cloud in the sky. We had ordered everybody. We have 2 high-rises at NSA, and then we have 1 low-rider building. We ordered everybody who could get out of the high-rises out for reasons that should be clear, and kind of decamp to the low-rider, the 3-story building. And blessedly, the low-rider is where our op center is. So I could go there. I had all the communications in the universe. It was a great place to be. But one shop we could not move was our counterterrorism shop. I mean, you understand that Fort Meade is not just NSA's headquarters. That's where we do most of our stuff. So the counterterrorism shop, they're not filling out reports. They got headsets on. They're doing stuff. So we can't move them. I mean, you can't have a break-in mission on this day. So they had to stay up there. So as we're getting to dusk, I figured I need to go talk to these people. So I went up to them, one of the upper floors of one of the biggest buildings, and almost all of them were Arab Americans. So, you know, for the obvious language requirements. This is a tough day for them on multiple dimensions, personally, professionally, as citizens. I didn't say much, kind of one of those presencing things, you know, just be there, the director's there, keep it up, you know, steady, that sort of thing. While I was up there, part of our logistics force was tacking up blackout curtains on these windows because it was dusk. And I had the thought, I am sitting here in Eastern Maryland and somebody's tacking up blackout curtains. It's going to be different. Things are going to change. 2 days later, I talked to the NSA workforce. I talked to an empty room. There was a camera. We didn't want anybody to have to gather anywhere, but we could beam it to their workstation. You know, we could beam it to their desktop. And so I went through some things I thought they should know. Like, look, I'll bet you some of your family members wish you didn't come to work today. They probably feel you're in danger here. So thank you for coming. Thank them for letting you come. Let me give you the good news. 300 million Americans right now wish they had your job. We got to play defense. We got to characterize any future attacks, but we're not going to play defense forever. Be patient. We're going to play offense, but right now it's defense. Is there a round 2? Is there a second wave? Focus on that. And then at the end, I kind of try to elevate the conversation. What I said was, look, all free peoples have always had to decide where they want to put their banner on that spectrum kind of identified between security and liberty. And we Americans, blessed by history, blessed by 2 very large oceans, we've always been free to put our banner up there next to liberty. said, that's under threat now. So here's the mission. We will keep America free by making Americans feel safe again. That's your task. So we began to change some of the things we were doing post 9/11. Now keep in mind, we still had all those technological challenges, volume, variety, velocity. I mean, Al-Qaeda is a backward organization, right? But they had the most modern of communications. They just had to go down whatever the equivalent of the Radio Shack is in Waziristan and buy the latest equipment. It's an incredibly modern thing that they could use and throw away and buy the next one. So you still had all that technological challenge, but now you had an additional mission challenge. So we began to shift our weight inside NSA. Remember that microwave shot? And I said, you're looking for that key word, launch? I mean, you're kind of looking at the content of communications. We entered a whole new art form post 9/11, in which we were still kind of interested in what people were saying, but we were more interested in what we call metadata, which is the fact of the phone call. You know, who's on that phone? Who was this phone called before? Based on a pattern of calls, I'm pretty confident I know who's on this phone. I know who uses this phone. I know what that person does. Metadata and geolocation. Where is that phone? I need to know where that phone is down to about 5 meters. And we actually turned our whole organization on its head to do this new task, to be able to, through metadata, identify whose phone is that, and through geolocation, know where that phone is right now. And you're probably all a bit ahead of me in the plot line here, but that's magnificent information if your purpose in life is to kill the communicant. And it was incredibly useful for that. And there are a lot of people who would do you and me harm who are no longer able to do that because we, at the National Security Agency and other places, were able to perfect that kind of science. There was another kind of science. Had to do, and this one gets edgy, and it gets into the political realm, and it gets into serious questions among serious people as to how much is enough. Remember that security, liberty balance I was talking about? The 9/11 Commission determined that the most important communications Al-Qaeda would make would be communications with one end in the United States of America. I mean, this is a cartoon, all right? But bear with me, just so you get a sense of what it is I'm talking about. Let's say we've got a very bad man in the tribal region of Pakistan. We know he's an Al-Qaeda leader. We know what he's doing. We know what he's planning. And frankly, we're trying to intercept his phone calls. So he makes a phone call at 9 o'clock in the morning to one of his Confederates, let's say in London. And he says, brother, how is the plan for the attack going? Well, you know, we need that attack to take place before 6 o'clock tomorrow. Can you do that, brother? Yes, I can. Thank you. And hangs up. And at noon, he makes another phone call. He calls a Confederate, this time in Paris. Says, brother, how's the plan for the attack going? Oh, it's going well. Will you be ready? Yes, we will be ready. What time is 0 hour? 6 o'clock tomorrow. Oh, thank you. Good. And at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he picks up the phone and he makes another call. All right? Now he calls Schenectady, New York. And he says, brother, how's the attack plan going? I would suggest to you that your initial instinct is not to say to NSA, I'm sorry, one end of that call is in the United States. Hang up. Don't listen to this guy. That's the challenge we had. And the program that Ralph referred to, the terrorist surveillance program, was designed to give us a higher probability that that last phone call, the one I just described for you, we would have a higher probability that we would actually intercept that call. Because of the three I suggested to you, all of them important, that third one is probably the one that is most important. And President Bush gave us authority to do it under his Article II authorities as Commander-in-Chief, and I know it's controversial, and Jim Risen and Eric Lichtblau won a Pulitzer Prize for revealing the story in December of 2005, and we got all these sorts of subplots about trips to hospitals in Northwest DC with the Attorney General and so on, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. But let me just share with you, the program was successful, it was carefully run, and in 2 court cases in which the appellate courts were to judge the president's authority, In both those cases, the courts have concluded that we take as a given, this is a quote, we take as a given that the president has inherent constitutional authorities to conduct electronic surveillance without a warrant for foreign intelligence purposes. Now, I know this is going to generate questions, so I won't dwell on it anymore, but that was the crux of the terrorist surveillance program, pivoting this agency in the direction of the current threat. Well, look, there are a lot of other things going on, and I know Ralph wants some time for questions. Let me just give you one more turn of the wheel, okay? One more cycle of big things that are happening in this universe that might intrigue you. Remember that World Wide Web thing and Endpoint and commuting to the target, right? And pulling off that stuff that somebody may or may not decide to transmit? We call that, what I just described for you, computer network exploitation. That's going to someone else's network and exploiting it. It's going to someone else's network and pulling information off of that network. It's espionage. It's spying. Everybody does it. Okay? It is considered acceptable international practice. Okay. No, that's a technical term, and it's true. The Deputy Secretary of Defense, Bill Lind, he just left about a year ago. Secretary Lind wrote an article, 18 months ago now, 2 years, on this cyber stuff. And Secretary Lind said, of all the things happening in the cyber world, you know, out there in that electromagnetic spectrum I've been telling you about, the biggest problem we have right now is people stealing our stuff. People stealing your private information, your credit card number, your bank account information, your trade secrets, your intellectual property. People are out there stealing it. And that's the greatest danger we now have out there in the cyber domain. There's a think tank on K Street in Washington called CSIS. And a little more than 2 years ago, they did a survey of citizens of first world nations, you know, kind of cyber competent people. And in this survey, they said, who do you fear most in cyberspace? Who scares you? They're talking about nation states. What country scares you the most? Now, I know you're all forming an answer in your mind, okay? But it almost certainly is not the answer they gave. They gave the United States of America as the country they feared most in cyberspace. Now, Ralph has already introduced me as the director of the National Security Agency. That's success. Okay? That's a compliment. Thank you. But we self-limit. We steal things in cyberspace to protect your liberty, to protect your security, and to preserve your safety. We don't steal things for profit. We don't steal things to support American commerce. There are very few nations on earth who could form those last 2 or 3 sentences I formed and have them be true. I think there are a total of 5. They all speak English, and they're all democracies. Everyone else steals for commerce. Everyone else steals for profit. We don't. We self-limit. We focus on espionage in the cyber domain for national security. I don't know what to do with this problem. The Chinese are stealing us blind. There was a study published about 2 months ago by something called NCIX, the National Counterintelligence Executive, that for the first time had an organ of the American government saying publicly that which those of us on the inside have known to be true for years. China's espionage effort against the United States in the cyber domain is a thing to behold. Look, I'm a professional intelligence officer. Let me give you my grade on what the Chinese are doing. I stand back in awe at the breadth, depth, persistence, and sophistication of the Chinese intelligence effort against we Americans. As a professional, it is really something to behold. So, I've created this new domain, Endpoint, commuting to the target, computer network exploitation, stealing data, pulling stuff off. It's a serious problem. We do it, but we self-limit. Beyond that, though, something happened in the last year or two that makes this whole thing even more interesting. We're still in this cyber domain. Right? If I say Stuxnet, do I get some nods? For those who know it, let me just quickly, those who don't know it, let me quickly summarize. Somebody launched a computer attack against the Iranian nuclear facility at Natanz. It was a very sophisticated attack, not something you and I can pull off from our mom's basement or our dad's garage. This requires an awful lot of work, a lot of resources. It infected the control system at Natanz, sent signals to a whole cascade of centrifuges, directed the centrifuges to spin at self-destructive speeds while telling the operator, everything's cool. And it destroyed about 1,000 centrifuges. Now look, given my personal background, what Ralph described for you, I consider that to be an unalloyed good. Okay? That's just a wonderful thing. But let me step back a little bit and re-describe what it was I just described in a slightly different way. Someone, almost certainly a nation state, has just used a computer weapon as a legitimate act of, fill in the blank, self-defense, counterproliferation, during time of peace, to destroy what another nation could only describe as their critical infrastructure. Time of peace, legitimate act, computer weapon, destroy critical infrastructure. That is a big deal. If you saw me on 60 Minutes about 2 weeks ago, I said something about this is a really good idea, that attack on Natanz, but it's also a really big idea. This is the Legion crossing the Rubicon. We've got a Legion on the other side of the river now. I don't mean to compare it in terms of destructive power or anything, but for someone with my background, this smells like August 1945. A new class of weapon has just been used to create physical destruction. A weapon that had never been used before. So this whole, what'd you call it, digital underworld or?
Electronic underworld.
Electronic underworld is gaining increasing significance in the things that are necessary to secure your safety. Let me give you one more turn of the wheel. Okay, remember we began way back in the history of signals intelligence with HF signals, and I've been cranking us forward now for 30 minutes. Let me give you one more turn of the wheel. Facebook, Twitter, you all familiar terms? Okay. Most people are nodding yes. Okay, good. Omar Suleiman was the head of security, the intelligence chief for Hosni Mubarak, the president of Egypt. I know Omar very well. I've visited Egypt several times as director of CIA. I liked Omar. He was good at his job. He was really good at the most important part of his job, which was keeping his friend Hosni Mubarak in power for the last 30 years. And I make no value judgment here. This is not an ethical decision I'm trying to suggest. I'm just telling you, Omar was good. And Omar knew what to do to stop any real threats to overthrowing the Mubarak regime. And Omar was overwhelmed by what happened. To recall the sequence of events, a Tunisian fruit merchant immolates himself after being insulted by a female policeman. That gets captured on the web. It kind of ignites a firestorm through Twitter and Facebook. And within a matter of 5 or 6 weeks, there are 1 million Egyptians in Tahrir Square calling for the overthrow of the Egyptian government. I said Omar was good. He had nothing to cope with the velocity and the ubiquity of what was coming at him in this new cyber domain, this electronic underworld, this digital force. And because of that, the government fell. This is almost McLuhan-esque. I was old enough to remember those books we had to read in college in the 60s, Marshall McLuhan, The Medium is the Message. In this case, the medium that overthrew the revolution is the real message here. It overwhelmed Omar Suleiman. It overwhelmed Hosni Mubarak. But let me continue the story. It overwhelmed the 1 million people in Tahrir Square. It has generally taken a very long time in our history to get 1 million people to do anything simultaneously. And in that period of time where you're building up to that event, lots of things happen. Like you get organized, you select leaders, you develop platforms, you negotiate minimal demands. In other words, the revolution gets a structure. This revolution jumped over that. This revolution skipped that step. This revolution went from self-immolation to 1 million people, and the government fell. And the 1 million people in Tahrir Square are as much out of power as Omar Suleiman or Hosni Mubarak, because they weren't prepared to take power because of the velocity created by this new phenomenon. Egypt's being run today by the Muslim Brotherhood and the military, neither of which were in Tahrir Square. My wife, Janine, I mentioned, is here with me. She's back from that skiing trip I told you about earlier. She is a board member for the National Military Family Association. Okay. And they talk to different industries and solicit donations. So we're in the kitchen a couple months back, and I'm chopping carrots or something, and she's on the phone with another board member, and they are scheduling a lunch with the CEO of Twitter. And since I'm the former director of NSA, they thought, maybe it'd be a good thing if I were there and, kind of talk to him about electronic stuff and what's going on and so on. We just create the ambience to make him more rather than less generous to support the National Military Family Association. And so Janine kind of puts her hand over the mouthpiece and says, we're having lunch with the CEO of Twitter. Do you want to come? I go, oh yeah, I want to come. And she said, yeah, she put her hand back over. I mean, why are you so enthusiastic about this? And I said something along the lines of, I want to know what it's like to overthrow a government. I was director of CIA for almost 3 years, and not once did I have a chance. What I'm trying to suggest to you, that this digital realm, this electronic underworld, has taken on a massive importance in our life. Now, I've kind of approached it from a narrow point of view of somebody in the security field. I talk about espionage and cyber weapons and so on. But you recognize how much it's changed how you live. Okay? And we are having you are having challenges as much as we are having challenges dealing with this new reality. You don't know how to protect yourself out there. You don't know if your firewalls are good. You don't know if you can do online banking safely or not. In the same way, we're trying to catch up with this new cyber domain to be able to do things to protect your security, your liberty, and your safety. And we don't have any rules. I'm just, pretend I'm still in government, all right? I don't know what you want me to do out there. I don't know what you'll let me do out there in this new domain, this new electronic universe, digital underworld. I mean, I could sit here for, I'm going to stop in about 3 minutes, Ralph, when we get to questions. But I could sit here and wave my arms. I could sit here and wave my arms and convince you this was a very dangerous object. Okay? I could Janine and I bought these iPhones last summer, 4th of July weekend. And, you know, you go into the Apple store and the young kid comes to you and he knows this stuff. It's actually a very good shopping experience. And he's explaining all this thing to me, and I'm throwing my BlackBerry over my shoulder and saying, yeah, iPhone, yeah, that's good. And he says to me, and now here, you hit this. There's the App Store. There are 400,000 apps for the iPhone. And he turns and does something else, and I turn to Janine and says, this kid really doesn't know who I am, does he? Because as far as I'm concerned, 400,000 apps mean 400,000 attack vectors to take over my phone. Now, I could do this. I sometimes do it for an hour and make everyone frightened about their phone. And I can turn this new digital underworld into a zone of conflict. Okay? And your thoughts as Americans, as taxpayers, is zone of conflict. Where the hell is my government? Why aren't they out there defending me? Zone of conflict, I'm paying taxes. Well, half of us are paying taxes, sorry. I want to be defended. Where's my government? And then I get all done, and perhaps you'll give me a smattering of polite applause, and then you'll reach into your pocket, and you'll actually turn this thing on. In what was a zone of conflict at the height of my arm waving is now a zone of your personal communications. In every stitch of your American political culture skeletal system thinks government in my zone of personal communication? I don't think so. I don't want the government there at all. Well, okay, the government's got to be there. I certainly don't want it to be omnipresent or omniscient, and I certainly don't want it to be powerful. And so in this new universe, where so much of importance is out there in ones and zeros, you haven't told the people who are serving you in the security community what it is you want them to do, what it is you will let them do. We've worked out these rules in physical space. No, even in physical space, we still kind of get roughed up around the edges in terms of what constitutes, remember the Fourth Amendment? Reasonable search and seizure, right? Even in physical space, we've got some rough edges. But by and large, in physical space, we've worked it out. We know what we want the government to do. We know what we'll let the government to do. I mean, I usually travel with a little backpack, you know, keep my notebook in there, cell phone, batteries, whatever. If I were to walk out of here and up towards the main street, and one of your local police department guys was to walk up to me and say, hey, open your bag, I would respond with a two-word monosyllabic Old English phrase. That loosely translates to, definitely not. But if tomorrow morning I drive down to BWI and go through the TSA checkpoint, and the young fellow there says, open your bag, everybody in this room opens their bag because we've worked it out. We understand it. We have not yet gotten to that area of common agreement in this area that Ralph's syllabus is pointing out. So you've got security services out there trying to do the right thing, being very aggressive, trying to defend both your liberty and your security in a domain for which we have not yet decided on the rules. So the next thing that really has to happen is an adult conversation in which you tell the people who are out there trying to defend you in this space what you want them to do and what you'll let them to do. And with that consensus, we Americans, who actually know the technology really well, we Americans can turn this new domain to advantage, to safety, security, and liberty. But until that happens, we are what we call in the Air Force in a tail chase. We're behind where we need to be. And Ralph, I think I filled up enough space. I'll stop.
Okay, Okay, I've got so many questions, but I'm not going to do it because they've got so many questions as well. I'm going to follow up with one thing because we're getting it from our Second Life world as well, and I'm sure it's on everybody's mind here. I doubt you're going to be able to answer this question, but I'm going to ask it on behalf of those who've asked it. And that is, I'll put it this way, did they ever figure out who did Stuxnet against the Iranians?
I will give you the answer that I gave on 60 Minutes. That, given my personal background, it would be irresponsible for me to even speculate.
I knew you weren't going to answer that. All right, your turn. We're going to do the usual thing, alternate between student questions and non-student questions. Let's start with a student question, please. Raise your hand if you have a question from a student. This is your chance. All right, you're gone. Non-student question. Right over here, sir. Hold on. At the back.
Do you have a feel for how much of the communication you can catch on reverse technology as opposed to what you can do with it after you get it?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Got to paraphrase. Question, because not everybody can hear. Question is, do you have any idea how much you can get on the first burst of technology and what you can do with it? No? No? Okay. Told you we couldn't hear it. Burst technology.
Compressing messages in a very small 1 second.
Yeah.
All right, you're going to have to explain the question because the rest of us don't know what he's talking about.
In essence, what you're trying to do is to compress a signal to such a small burst of energy that it frankly hides in plain view, and it's very difficult to detect or intercept that signal because its life is so quick. And that presents great challenges to us. So anyone with that kind of technology makes it harder for us to intercept their communications. Now look, in all intelligence, advantage is transient, all right? This is always a race. And so, you know, relative strengths and weaknesses change as your genius, your technology, your people gain advantage, but they're never permanent. Things move on. And here's one that's very hard. But I would suggest to you that if in a this is purely illustrative, it really is, but if in a suspicious area of the world where you didn't expect it, you began to detect burst transmissions, that would really draw your attention in and of itself. And so there are all these trade-offs.
Okay, sounds like the answer is we're working on it. Question from a student. Raise your hand. Okay, yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
I asked earlier during dinner if the terrorist surveillance system was in any way, shape, or form used by ICE. But now I just wanted to ask if, in general, NSA had any affiliation with ICE at any point in time.
Okay, question is, was the terrorist surveillance program, which I would call the domestic surveillance program, but officially it isn't called that, connected with ICE?
Right.
You'll have to explain to people what that is.
Immigration and Customs. Yep. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. My answer is no. Okay.
You know what? Let's make the question clear. I think the question is about whether American phone conversations and email, electronic communications, whether the information from that was being conveyed from your agency to other agencies that deal with immigration and customs enforcement.
Okay. Remember what I said, the appellate court said, we take it as a given, the president has inherent constitutional authority to conduct electronic surveillance without a warrant for foreign intelligence purposes. The body of American law gives the intelligence services a little more running room than law enforcement services because fundamentally all we can do is invade your privacy. Law enforcement institutions can put you in jail. And no, this is the distinction in law. And that's why it says for foreign intelligence purposes. So it can only be used for that purpose. The president doesn't have the authority to, on his own, authorize electronic surveillance for any other purpose. It comes under his Article 2 authorities as Commander-in-Chief. So it can only be used for the defense of the nation.
But the question was it used in this way?
No.
Okay. All right. Question from a non-student. Yes, sir.
You talked about general signals intelligence, which basically encompasses ELINT, comment rated, all the various kinds of intelligence, communications intelligence, radar intelligence, electronic intelligence. But you steered away. You talked probably 95% about NSA, and you steered away about human. What's the nexus between ELINT and human, internationally and nationally?
Okay, question is, what's the connection between collecting signals intelligence and collecting human intelligence? And just so you don't think the general made that decision on his own, I asked, because our next week's speaker is going to be focusing on human intelligence, I asked him to focus on electronic intelligence. But of course, if you want to discuss it, go ahead.
The mantra we had between the two, and George Tenet, who was DCI, really pushed this. Human enabling SIGINT, SIGINT enabling human, to get it in this constant loop. I told you how difficult modern signals were, right? Some are in the ground, some don't move, they reside, you've got to commute to the signal. Without getting into details, in order to access many signals, you require human penetration. On the other hand, intercepted signals can cue human intelligence collectors to know who they should approach, what questions they should ask. So there is a powerful, when you get it right, there is a powerful synergy between the two disciplines. They should reinforce one another, not compete.
Question from a student. Yes, sir.
I understand the premise behind being able to gather foreign intelligence like the presidential acts, but what exactly is the justification behind launching an attack on a sovereign nation like Yemen or Pakistan?
Okay, question is, what is the justification or the rationale for launching an attack on another nation like Yemen or Pakistan?
Okay, so this is not a cyber attack, it's just
any kind of attack.
Yeah.
Although in this case, in both of those cases, I think it would be fair to say the NSA and the CIA used electronic methods to facilitate the
kinetic attack.
Yeah.
Now, our word for what you're describing is kinetic attack, as opposed to cyber attack. I'll be brief because it's not in the sweet spot of what you asked me to talk about, but I feel very strongly about it. 2 successive presidents, the American Congress, and the American court system have unanimously stated we are a nation at war with Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, and this war is global in scope, and that we have the legitimate right to pursue this enemy, the legal right to pursue this enemy wherever he may be. Eric Holder, the current Attorney General, an individual with whom I have several severe disagreements, gave a speech at Northwestern last week. And I was all prepared to get a copy of it and take out my red pen and correct all his errant thinking. And I didn't have a comment on it. I thought it was spot on. And so there is unanimity among the 3 American branches of government. We are in a global war. It is not confined to internationally agreed theaters of conflict, that's Iraq and Afghanistan, and that we have the legal right. Now, it doesn't always make political sense or operational sense to do it, but we have the legal right to pursue this enemy globally. I believe it. I think it's right. I am convinced that it keeps America safe, but I am compelled to add that with the possible exception of Israel, we are the only nation on the planet who believes we are right.
Okay, question from a non-student. Yes, sir. I'm going to take this one.
In your comments about what China is doing for us commercially, have you any thoughts about what we can do to change the balance?
Okay, questions about your comment during your remarks that the Chinese are stealing us blind. What can the U.S. do about it?
Yeah, I actually got this question on a phone call about 2 years ago. And so what should we do about it, Hayden? And I kind of suspected, based on the tone of the question, it was from another think tank in D.C., I got suspected from the tone of the question, issue a démarche was not going to be a satisfactory answer, okay? And here's what I did say. I said, your question reminds me of what my dad told me when I was about 9 years old and came home beat up from a fight. Stop whining, act like a man, and defend yourself. And so an awful lot of this is just going out and defending yourself. Okay? So that's important. That needs to be done. Beyond that, actions should have consequences. Nations should not be able to steal us blind for commercial profit without our being able to take proportionate sanctions against that nation. I don't mean economic sanctions, embargoes, but I mean, we have an incredibly powerful symbiotic relationship with China. Frankly, I think in the long term, they're more dependent on the American market than we are with regard to their lending. And therefore, we have tools in our toolbox that we could use to the Chinese saying, you see that kind of behavior? We don't accept it anymore. And I do think we ought to take serious measures to impose penalties for the most egregious behavior.
General, a couple questions from Second Life that I'm just going to conflate into a single question about the use of social media, which you talked about a lot in your opening remarks. You talked about it from the point of view of what's happening out there and our observation of it. The questions are basically about whether the United States uses social media in the electronic underworld, either to surveil the online worlds, various online worlds, or to spread democracy using the crowdsourcing techniques and social media techniques.
Yeah, I'm going to confine my answer to the intelligence world, okay? And here, I mean, you all know what social media is. And
you talked about the spread of democracy in your remarks.
No, I didn't. I understand. But I'm at liberty to give details on the one. Social media appears, right verb, appears to be a new frontier in our ability to anticipate events abroad, okay? We used it well enough during the Arab awakening to follow events, right? And it was a very useful tool. But following events, although good, is not the highest form of art for an intelligence organization. You want to anticipate them. And so now the challenge is, can you use social media, which is readily available, you can absorb it. Is there science and art out there that allows you to use it to actually predict where things are going? And the jury's out. We're not sure. I mean, keep in mind, there's only a certain class of people on social media. It's not everybody in Egypt doing this. It was a small group. Now, in this case, it turned out to be very predictive. There could be other examples where it's not predictive. And so we are, I'll use the word struggling, and I don't mean that in a terribly negative sense, but we're now trying to embrace this new potential and to see what we can do about it. But the jury's out.
And given the difficult lines that you yourself drew in your remarks, how difficult would it be, or how easy would it be, to segregate your observations of what's going on out there and predicting what's happening out there from your observations of what's going on in the United States and what might be happening?
Yeah, this is back to that interconnectedness, where I said, you know, your emails are coexisting with Al-Qaeda's, right? And now, let's say you want to do something, and I'm speaking again in an illustrative way. Let's say you want to do something to move the ball down the field somewhere else. You want to influence events via messaging, all right? One can do that. Governments do that sort of thing. But now the world is so interconnected that I challenge you to think of a way in which you can do that, in which the effects are confined to beyond the United States borders, and where the effects do not blow back into the American public discourse of these issues. And that intelligence agencies cannot do. And so you've got this new stress point because, well, look, okay, not hypothetical. So Americans give Italian non-communist parties money to run newspapers in Italy following World War II so the communists don't take over. Probably not much danger that's going to blow back in the American public discourse. It's print, it's in Italian, it's in Europe. But now do that, think of that, in a global telecommunications grid in which everyone is present, everyone has access, and pretty much the language of the grid is yours, English. How do you confine the effects to overseas? So it's hard.
Question from a student. Question from a student. I'm looking up in the balcony. Where? Okay, go ahead.
I have a question about the January 2000 shutdown of the NSA. What caused it?
Okay, questions about the incident you mentioned in which the NSA's collection analysis capability broke down or got shut down. Do you know what caused it?
Yeah, just a 10-year history of plugging new stuff in without any real architecture, without any logical system, without any ability to monitor the system. Remember I told you volume, variety, velocity, explosion of communications and all that? Well, the agency's trying to keep up, so, okay, I need another one of those, plug it in. And we just kept plugging stuff in.
You plugged in a toaster?
And yeah, I mean, pretty much that's what happened. And the system just kind of coughed, wheezed, and just died. And it took us a long time. I mean, 4 days is a long time. We made some decisions. I've been director about 10 months, and I knew this was an issue. But keep in mind, NSA is a national treasure. It does important work. You don't want to break it. And so I was being fairly cautious. After this happened in January 2000, I said, I got it. There is no course of action I could set out on that would be more dangerous than standing here. And so I got very active. We went to the private sector for IT, information technology advice. And ultimately, believe it or not, we outsourced NSA, the gem of American telecommunications and computing power. NSA outsourced its own IT to a private sector company. And it is now being run by a consortium called Eagle Alliance. And it's just great.
General, I'm going to ask you a question that I know is on the minds of people in this room. You've been asked it earlier today, so forgive me for the repetition. It's been asked on Second World as well. Talk for just a moment to those in this room who are students who might be thinking about public service careers, perhaps in the intelligence community in one area or another, maybe
Sure.
not at the NSA, maybe at the CIA or wherever. What do you need to do that? What major or what skills should you be looking for, that sort of thing,
Sure.
just if you would.
American intelligence community comprised over 100,000 people. There are a lot of skill sets that are resident there. And so there's hardly anything, I think, that someone could master here that would not be of use in the American intelligence community. So that's the first thing I want to tell you. Second, since 9/11, we have been blessed by the generosity of the American people. My last year as director of CIA, we had 160,000 applicants to join the agency. And I don't mean 2 clicks on the website. I mean filling out all that very invasive personal information stuff and sending it in. The number we took in is actually a classified number, so I can't share it with you, but obviously it's a fraction of 160,000. The 2 or 3 things that distinguish the people who got over the bar. First of all, the average entering age. In my last year as director, full year would be 2008. The average entering age was 29. So gives you some sense. The distinguishing characteristics of the folks who got in: graduate work, life experience, and mastery of a foreign language, or 2, or 3. In terms of life experience, obviously with an entering age of 29, you got a lot of life experience out there. About 1/4 of the people who joined us, 20 to 25%, were GIs. They were former military. They kind of matured in the armed forces, proved their worth. Clearly they showed up for work. They could be trusted, and that helped them in the competition.
I was a little surprised in your remarks that you didn't even really mention language. You didn't mention cryptography at all. You didn't mention languages. Talk about languages here. Spanish good, French good. What would you recommend? And what about fields like math or physics? Or,
Yeah. Okay. If they taught it to you in high school, it's probably not at the top of our list, okay? Unless, of course, you got an Urdu immersion course somewhere around here. Or Pashto, or Arabic, or Farsi, or Korean, or Chinese. All right, so
those are the ones you would recommend.
the more exotic, the better. We don't throw anybody back. You know, Spanish speakers, French speakers, all great. By the way, if you're a French speaker, let me remind you what the diplomat once told me. Okay? French is an African language, also spoken by one small country in Europe. So, I'm just saying, you need to be, okay, as you pick your languages, you need to know. Mathematics. The National Security Agency is the lifeblood of American mathematical science. The agency puts seed money out there amongst a variety of universities that actually feed American math genius. There are more PhDs, mathematicians, who go to work at Fort Meade than anywhere else on the planet. And so mathematics is incredibly important for us because it leads to cryptologic excellence, code making, and code breaking. So language, very important. For NSA, mathematics. For CIA, it's just got a variety of skills that's required. And as I said, if you can think of someone in the local community doing something, we probably got somebody like that too.
Okay. I've lost track of where we were. Question from a student? You a student? Non-student. Go for it.
If your business is stealing somebody else's secrets, how do you feel when somebody steals from you, like it is? And how do you see the future to prevent kind of happening again? Or how do you, I see you're very open in your interviews and you describe the agency, that's great. But is there any other way to somehow align people on your side than the others?
Okay, question is, you're stealing other people's secrets, and we've got secrets too. And I'll broaden that a little bit also to point out to the audience that all the things you say are out there for the U.S. to gather and collect and seek out and so on and analyze. That's also true for the United States. Our stuff is also out there for others to capture. How do you prevent others from going after our stuff?
Yeah. First of all, the question was, how do I feel when somebody steals our secrets? I feel bad, okay? Interestingly, this is not generally well known. It's public, it's not secret. But NSA is both our offensive and defensive squad, all right? There's a significant fraction of the National Security Agency that is focused on protecting American secrets. Remember, code makers, code breakers. The reason, and not every nation does this, puts the offensive and defensive team in the same organization. But we do, and we think it's a very good, you gotta be pretty rich to do this. You gotta have a lot of resources, so we're able to do it. But the key word for both offense and defense, the single unifying concept, vulnerability. It's all about vulnerability. And if you can master vulnerability, you can attack and you can defend. And so we find the synergy of having both squads in the same place, working the same problems to be very powerful. I'll add one final thought. As good as we were, as much as people fear us in terms of our ability to do these sorts of things, we have far more to lose than any other society. We have put so much of our stuff, you know, all that stuff you used to keep in a safe or in a locked drawer, you used to keep on your hard drive. You're now putting it out there on something called the cloud. Someone said to me that should be called the fog, but I don't know. And so we are more vulnerable than most. We need to be sensitive to that.
Does the NSA put anything on the cloud?
NSA is moving towards a closed cloud architecture.
That would be called a CCA, I guess. Okay. Closed cloud architecture. All right, yes, ma'am, go ahead.
How much sharing of information do we do with our allies, and are there structures set up
Okay, question is, how much sharing does the U.S. do with its allies, and is there a structure set up to facilitate that? I'll broaden it to say, how much offense do we do with our allies, and is there a structure set up to support that?
How do you mean offense?
Do we spy on our friends?
No.
No, of course not.
Would Churchill say, don't have permanent friends, only permanent interest, or something?
He didn't answer the question.
That's correct.
Go ahead.
And let the record show,
Yes,
I did not answer that question.
That's right.
I was director for about 31 months. In that 31 months, me and my deputy visited over 50 countries. None of it for tourism. All of it about relationships. Our relationship with other intelligence services is just a wonderful thing. We're big, we're rich, we're global, we're powerful, we're technologically advanced. They're local, they're focused, they're agile, they're linguistically smart, and culturally knowledgeable. That's a wonderful combination. We can take stuff they give us and put it into a global context. We can provide them information to which they would not otherwise have any kind of access. And so it is a very powerful relationship, and we spend an awful lot of time talking to friends. Now, keep in mind that if this is the United States and its values and its interests, there is no country on the planet whose values and interests fit like that. Even our best friends are a little bit different. And I must tell you, we have some people with whom we cooperate. Words like that. And the job of Dave Petraeus now, and before him Leon, and before him me, is to take that space, act within it consistent with American values and American interests, but act within it for common purpose. And so we do spend an awful lot of time on what you described. It's very important.
Before we say thanks tonight to General Hayden, allow me to preview our next program. Next week, not 2 weeks, but next week on March 21st, we'll meet someone who has literally served in the trenches of U.S. intelligence and espionage. Robert Gurnier served 3 decades in the CIA, on the ground in places like Iraq and Pakistan, and as a trainer of human intelligence agents at what the CIA refers to as the farm. To be sure you don't miss announcements about this kind of program in the future, get yourself on the list, right? It's electronic. If you put yourself on this list, you know, who knows where it goes. You can print your name clearly and your email address clearly on the bright orange sheet out in the lobby on your way out. And now, please let's thank our special guest tonight, General Michael Hayden.